Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Catherine Mattice, founder and CEO of Civility Partners. We are a consulting firm focused on building positive workplace environments, and I am so excited to have Kate Bailey here with me from Hand and Heart. She's got some cool stuff going on that I've never heard of before, and that's pretty rare for, for me when it comes to solving bullying and harassment. So I'm excited for her to talk with you today about the workplace reconciliation model that she's come up with. She is a workplace consultant, a podcast producer, a trained investigator, and her consulting firm is called Hand and Heart. They're the world's first fully digital food and beverage consultancy, or F&B, if you know the lingo. Just super excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I also have to say that it's a real honor. I really appreciate the work that you do in this space. And yeah, I'm thrilled to have a chat.
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't even know. We met because we were introduced, I think, a couple months ago, and then we just had a natural connection given our worlds. So tell me, you're from food and beverage, and now you're doing workplace changes and making the world better. Tell us what you do.
Yes. So my background in hospitality, really was born out of how you put yourself through school and study. And I always just found myself, as many people do, gravitating back to the industry. And I started to move into the operational side of consulting. And very quickly, as I'm sure you can imagine, I realized that any kind of thing that you do operationally doesn't matter unless there's cohesion within the teams. So I just began a path of education and knowledge seeking in that domain. And naturally, because when I was working with clients on an operational level, I was naturally trying to solve these issues anyway to make the operations work. So there was a very natural inflow with the work that I was already being required to do. And yeah, it really evolved from there. And I started to move more into the food tech space. And then from food tech into startups. So it's really is the full funnel of businesses. And more recently, there's been a focus on investigations and investigations being something that can be difficult to encourage workplaces to do. However, if it's inbuilt into a general consulting package, you can say, well, when this investigation concludes, we can also help you with what you need to do thereafter. And there was just a little bit of a gap in Europe. And I have been working in that space, I guess, ever since, in between all of that. And yeah, that's kind of how we got from A to B.
Okay, or from F to B if we're using the language. Okay, so tell us about this thing that you've created, the Mckellar reconciliation program, and this is fascinating for anybody listening. Get your popcorn. Go ahead, Kate.
So this situation is very interesting. It really speaks to the way communication around workplace issues has changed, because now it's happening on social media. Now, to keep the headline short, there was a beer company, and this beer company the allegations about their workplace were raised amidst a much bigger craft beer movement. And what had happened was, by circumstance, and there's a full podcast about it, actually. It's called Super Cool Toxic Workplace. So if anyone needs to fill in the gaps, they can keep it at the headlines. I ended up working with a group of people from that workplace who had been, having historically bad experiences, but also currently bad experiences. As a workplace consultant, I tried to reach out to the company and make them aware of the situation. And it wasn't the time or place where that engagement could happen, for obvious reasons. Because I also have a background in podcast producing, I realized that I would be able to investigate the claims more from a journalistic perspective in order to create that. The primary reason for doing that, because we chose to fund that, was to demonstrate that the stories that people come to the table with, even if there's questions about them, they need to be heard. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be addressed. there is no promise of a better tomorrow without a full reconciliation of yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And what eventuated from the release of the podcast was the company and I having discussions, and I think a genuine realization on their part that things had escalated to a point where they needed to try something different. Now, the situation was that what does a company besieged in the media and a company besieged by former employees and current employees and stakeholders all over the shop do when it's gone to that way?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking a lot about reconciliation and what that means. We need to create an opportunity for a workplace to rehabilitate, to open the door to practitioners like yourself, where leaders can be rehabilitated out of the culture that they themselves are probably suffering from as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's all good and well, but we can't deprioritize the people that were impacted by those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Atonement can take on many different forms, and reconciling the past can take on many different forms, but the status quo, I think, is settlements and payouts and litigation and all of these different things. And the company didn't want to do that, and the people involved didn't want to do that. So what do we do? And that's when we created the workplace reconciliation model. The point of this is to facilitate a process which nearly exactly replicates investigation where required, but also the discovery process of litigation. What do an allegation is raised? What do both sides say? What do we look at? And what is a valid claim?
Right.
And it's important to have external practitioners come in and be making those assessments, because the whole process needs to be independent of the company, paid for by the company.
Right.
So that's what we did. We replicated that, and we're currently still processing the Mckellar reconciliation program. And we anticipate that it'll be finished soon. And there's a number of cases from Europe and also the US, but I do believe at this point that we can say, while not everything about that reconciliation model is perfect, it is setting a precedent for us to be able to work from, and for other practitioners to pick apart and see what works, and for businesses to also maybe recognize we don't just have to double down, deny everything, ignore everyone, and say it didn't happen, because there is a pathway forward if we say it.
Yeah. So so did Mckellar, is that am I saying it right?
Yes.
Did they approached you because of the podcast? They obviously were thinking, we don't want to have this out there. We need to make some changes. And I've had clients like that as well, where somebody went public with their complaint, and what would have been swept under the rug is suddenly they're willing to pay money to solve it. But how did you ultimately get them to agree to do it? Is this something that they were really open-minded about? Did it take a lot of, convincing that this was a good path forward?
Well, so we had some contact prior to the release of the podcast, wherein I asked a lot of questions, and they didn't cooperate. So when I connected with them after the podcast was released, they had come to me and said, we want to make this right. That's how the conversation began. And then that's when I came into the back and said, well, this is conceptually what I think works. Should I go back to the participants, the people who are directly involved in this, and present this to them and get their feedback and ask them, what do you need to feel safe to agree to this process? What makes you feel good about that? If hand and heart are going to be executing the work, are you okay with us being paid for that? Are you okay with XYZ? So and I guess it was just a classic mediation, but it really was myself listening to the company and taking a chance that they were really telling the truth and coming to the table. And the true test of that would be, could they agree to what the people who were affected really want and need to feel safe? And then they did. And that's how we managed to sort of broker the deal between all parties at the end.
And that's really what you're doing. You're brokering a deal. between the employees and the company to make sure that everybody's feeling safe. And that, I mean, I just never heard of this before, and it's awesome. I think you invented it, something new. Uh, so did and were some of the employees in your group, were some of them no longer working there, or they were all still employees? Does that matter when you're doing this?
No, so we opened it up for all former and current employees globally to be able to register on the platform, and we would distribute the work. And that was a decision of the company, of course, because I think obviously you're a practitioner, so you know that there are systems that exist for internal reporting, but there's a point where something else needs to exist. This circumstance needed that for the current employees. It is substantially more historical employees than current employees, but it's still there. And that said, the company has done a lot for current employees since this. So they haven't just done the reconciliation program. There has been an action plan. There have been external assessments and various things like that. So I can understand why the distribution is the way that it is. And it's a reassuring sign that a majority of the program is historical.
Yeah. A lot of times, you know, when we go into workplaces that are really toxic, it's obviously there's a real divide between the leaders and the workforce because there's no trust. And so we've got different things we recommend, you know, maybe start kind of managing by walking around and building relationships and being more transparent. But your piece of that is really like, let's really rebuild that strong relationship versus, you know, I don't know. I could totally see us making you a line item on our strategic plans that we build with our clients.
Likewise, with rehabilitative training, though, that is cutting edge, I think, in many ways, and given, you know, your history of it, but people have been forging towards this for a long time.
Yeah. So does the essentially the employees, former and current, they're laying out for you all of the things that they would need to feel that they could reconcile and move forward and feel safe. And I'm assuming there's some of it's talking about past transgressions and things that they want to see happen in the company for those future employees. And then the company comes back and says, yes, we agree to those things, or we agree with some changes. And what are some of the things on the list?
Yeah. So the first part, the brokering of the deal was, there was a list of requirements. The company met that in terms of what's happening now and what they can do moving forward. When it comes to the individual cases, we process them based on jurisdiction, first of all. We do a date of statement, which I guess would be the affidavit. We take the information from that, send it off to legal analysis, and they come back to us and say, we've identified the following issues. So if it's a bullying claim, they'll say, bullying is defined as X in this jurisdiction, and here are some historical cases and case law where a case like this has been processed, and these were the damages assigned. So that is the first part where you can say there are direct and material costs and damages. And every case should be analyzed for those things. Not every case amounts to something that requires monetary damages or fixed costs.
Right.
Then we move into the reconciliation side of things. So one of the ideas that came out of the process of designing this was, how can people be put on a path or have assistance on their professional path moving forward? So that would be professional coaching. How does an employee who's suffered from an abrasive leader, to use your perfect terminology, recover professionally? What tools do they need to rebuild their self-esteem and to get back on a professional path? Did the employee miss out on a promotion or job training? That can be included. And then there's other reconciliation that would be impact sessions. Do they want to have an impact session? Some people just don't. They just don't want contact with the company. Other people feel it's important. And these are just some of the examples. Psychological counseling. These are all things that we're working through based on each individual case and what everyone expresses that they would feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously has to be fair for the company as well, and that's why we're having independent legal work through everything, and we work through the reconciliation side with them, and what we land at is ideally a reasonable offer. And those offers are sent to the people and for them to be okay with it, and obviously to the company for them to be okay with it. If there's anything factual material that there's issues on, that is all worked with representatives from Mckellar and also an external legal counsel for them.
Right. This is awesome. Because I know too, a lot of times people feel like they should maybe go to court or file a case, but they don't have the energy. It saves everyone that, where, and also there's research that that's fairly damaging as well, because you're, reliving this thing over and over again that was really traumatizing for you. So it just sounds like it saves a lot of heartache for them. And also, I'm working on a research article right now with some colleagues where we have a book called Stand Up, Speak Out, and it was where we collected stories from people who essentially considered themselves successful in moving past being bullied and having a perfectly happy and healthy life after it. Whereas some people develop PTSD and they can't, go move forward. Because we wanted to figure out, like, what does that story look like? And, I'm an example. I was bullied. I started a company, and I live a pretty great life doing something I'm very passionate about. But what we found was, even the people who part of their success story was that they had gone through court and all that sued and had won, they still weren't really satisfied. Like, that wasn't what made them that's not why they felt successful, that they had won the court case. What they felt successful about was being able to get past it and move on. So I feel like, I don't know, it just kind of ties in that people don't want to sue. That's not, people don't, when people sue, it's because they just need to feel some sort of justice. And you provide that so then they can move forward, because that's something court does not provide. They don't provide the emotional reconciliation with it all. And so I just think this is cool. So cool.
Yeah, and you're 100% right about that emotional reconciliation, because most people, like, if they just got an apology the first time it had happened, or something happened and had been taken care of, everyone's lives would be different in some cases, which is incredible to think about. So it really is also about having companies go through this process and realizing that there's a reconciliation that, requires a bit of humility, but also for your business opens up incredible pathways. And again, when we talk about costs, and because this is business, every company that would choose a different, or would choose to reimagine how they resolve these things, is going to save money by doing these types of things. Right. And the learnings are going to be so much more substantial than from any litigation or anything like that. That just gets pushed out of the organization. They don't even learn from it. So I think it's necessary.
Yeah, it is. It really, really is. Someone is asking, what's the case, Jacob? And I think, Jacob, you're maybe referring to Kate talking about looking at various case law related to certain, complaints. So it's not necessarily one specific case that Kate's referring to. But if that's not your question, please comment, and we'll make sure we answer. So I'm curious, just as a culture nerd, where do you see, I'm calling myself a culture nerd, not you. Where do you see, culture going moving forward? And I know so far, well, I guess I have two questions. Have you only been doing this in food and beverage, beer industry, or have you been able to get into other industries? And then secondly, where do you see culture in food and beverage going, culture in any organization going, with COVID and everything we've been through?
Yes, thank you for these questions. So first off, I would say that when it comes to this all has happened actually within a year. So this reconciliation is all moved incredibly fast, and we've got one iteration of it so far, and we just need to sandbox and see where it goes. But what I like about it is that it's applicable to any industry, and it's applicable to every size of a business, and it just makes sense. So learning is the first step when it comes to reconciliation in the future. How do we make it better? How do we bulk it up with, the right ideas and practitioners, and then figure out how to take it forward? As it relates to work culture in general, I think one of the reasons I wanted it to be so malleable is because whether it's food and beverage, whether it's corporate office culture, Netflix, Activision, Twitter, it doesn't matter where you're working right now. There are extreme issues in the workplace. There is a massive political and existential renegotiation happening. Where I see that going inevitably, because I believe in humans, is to the right side of justice, to fairer conditions for people, which we know, and you have been doing this for so long. When employees have good, fair, awesome working conditions, business gets better. People have more money, and people are happier. People don't leave jobs. So in a way, it feels like we've tried 50 different other things to address what is really a core cultural problem that has always been there. We're just now able to talk about it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we're hopefully continue to move past training as the answer for problems and all of that. I think something that you and I are both doing in our work is digging into the people part and managing emotions and talking to people about their vulnerabilities. And if you're going to solve a people problem, I'm in California where we have mandatory harassment prevention training. That doesn't solve the people problem of harassment. It just is a tick the box. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm so excited to meet you in San Diego. Kate's one of the speakers at our International Association on Workplace Bullying and Harassment conference. So you'll have to check us out. Come to San Diego. Thanks so much, Kate. I really appreciate time with you, and thank you for letting me push it back a little bit. I appreciate your flexibility, and look forward to being good friends.
Likewise. And for anyone watching, also thank you for joining, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it looks like perhaps someone who works with you posted your website there in the chat. So you know how to get a hold of Kate. Visit her website, handandheart.eu, or certainly reach out to her on LinkedIn. And I'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.